Hello there, it's Susie Walker here from Psychologies magazine for our 1 p.m. broadcast today, and I am really thrilled to be joined by Amy Sinacola, who is a top coach trained by Barefoot, and we're going to be talking today about living with loss. Amy knows all about this because she in a previous life was a Macmillan nurse, so she's helped with people who were dealing with a diagnosis of cancer, and I know that must have been very stressful. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Susie. It's really, really lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Okay, so first of all, a lot of us have been dealing with loss over the last few months. I know I've got about 4 or 5 friends and colleagues who have, whether it's through COVID or through other reasons, have lost people in this period. It's a difficult time. What are some good ways that we can navigate this time?
You're right. It is a really difficult time, and I think that the losses that people are experiencing are so broad ranging from, obviously, like you're talking about the loss of a loved one, and the grief and the intense emotion that we feel with that, to the loss of, companies, businesses, incomes,
Yeah.
jobs, roles, identity. So many, there's so many different types of loss. And I think that's important to acknowledge, because often when you hear people talk about loss and grief, you immediately think of death and dying, but actually loss and grief are associated with so many aspects of our life that we go through all the time, actually. And even when there's positive events in our life, it's all part of this process of change, that we're moving from one event to something new. And even if it's something that we've chosen, like, getting married or moving to a new house or getting a better job, there's still this process of letting go of where we've come from. And again, that's even more exacerbated when it's a death, because again, it's this letting go of this kind of way of life, I suppose, that we were used to, into trying to navigate this kind of emotional storm into where we go now.
When you're going through the emotional storm, because as you're right, whether it's you're dealing with the loss of a loved one or you're dealing with the loss of a job, whether it's loss, whatever you define as your loss is, and you're going through the emotional storm, what's the best way to deal with the storm at the beginning?
At the beginning, I think one of the most important things we can do is actually show ourselves some real kindness and compassion, and look after ourselves. Because what we tend to do when we are going through difficulties is we kind of have these natural behaviour instincts. We were just talking about it before we came live, weren't we? How we have these natural tendencies to behave in a certain way. So whether it's, being very busy, or trying to be strong and look after other people, or whatever it might be, those are just exacerbated 10 times more. So we actually behave sometimes in ways that aren't particularly helpful. So I suppose firstly, it's kind of looking at what you are doing, and whether you actually are looking after yourself, because it's exhausting. Grief and loss is physically and mentally exhausting. And I think there's some research that shows, your brain actually changes during grief. And that's why we get the kind of the fuzz and the forgetfulness. We don't know what we're doing from moment to moment. It just feels like you're treading water just to keep your head above, to sink from stopping yourself sinking from drowning in it all. And occasionally a wave will come along and knock you over. That's how my mum described it when we lost my dad, that it was just this kind of constantly trying just to kind of keep going. And it's exhausted because your head and your heart aren't connected. You kind of, your heart's feeling one way and your head's telling you you've got to behave and do things another way. And actually sometimes you just need to connect those things and sit with what's happening, and be kind to yourself and look after yourself and nurture your body. And there's no escaping that pain in a way. And nobody, anything says or does, is going to make that necessarily go away, but there are ways of easing that pain. And I think definitely finding someone to talk to is really, really important. acknowledging that pain is part of life, isn't it? Pain and suffering is part of life. We can't go through life without experiencing that. We can't escape it. Somehow, acknowledging what's going on underneath all of that and finding someone to talk to can be really powerful. I think there's a lot of power in feeling heard and telling the story.
I think it's incredibly important, because I think, and I'm seeing it with my friends at the moment who are struggling with grief and loss, having lost a loved one. It's, life goes on around them. Do you know what I mean? So the rest of us are kind of going on, and we're getting to term with this, and I think it makes the person feel so lonely, because you're like, how can you be talking about that? Don't you realize that my mum has just died? Do you know what I mean? And it's that terrible, devastating kind of feeling. So by talking about it privately in a space that's just for you, to just be able to go on and on and on about it. Julia Rosenfield did a beautiful interview with hers recently. She wrote a memoir about grief, and she was talking very much about this, is that, as friends, what we can do is let the person just tell the stories about that person. So whether it is a professional or whether it is a really good friend that just allows you to talk, I think it's a really important piece of it, because otherwise it makes you feel even more isolated and alone.
Definitely, for sure. And I think finding that person is the key thing, because a lot of the time people feel uncomfortable talking about it. So sometimes we seek help from people and they just don't really know how to help us. They either want to try and fix us, so they say unhelpful things, or they kind of try and make you feel better. Like, someone said, I lost my mom who was old. And people almost thought that it was okay to say, well, she was old, you had lots of good times. Like, well, I did, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm really sad that I've lost my mom. It's not just that I'm grateful that I had lots of time with her, so I'm okay. I'm grateful I've had lots of time with her. I can be grateful for that. But yeah, and I still feel really, really sad. And I trained as a grief recovery specialist, and in their training they talk about how you can't compare losses. So again, another friend of mine was talking to somebody about when she lost her mum, and she's saying, well, it's all right for you because your mum was in her 70s when she died, and I lost mine when she was in her 50s, and you had longer, and your children got to meet their grand. It doesn't matter. You can't compare loss. Loss is loss. It's painful. It's hard. It's hurtful. It's horrible, and it's more about your relationship with that person and what they meant to you, and you can't compare that. For someone, that might be their dog, and it doesn't matter if that's the most meaningful relationship and it's causing them pain. It doesn't matter. Can't compare the loss, because the experience of the grief is the same.
I know you talk about dogs. I lost my dog Oscar earlier this year, and I felt embarrassed about talking about it because I've been literally terribly grief struck. He's with us for so long, almost 13 years. But because everyone else is kind of losing people, and you think, I'm embarrassed. It's only sort of certain dog owners that I can talk to about it who will understand. But as you say, loss is loss. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's no competition in it.
No, there isn't. So, okay, so the perfect storm is being heard, it's being acknowledged. What are the baby steps? Because I think the worst thing is feeling, oh my God, I'm going to stay stuck here.
Yeah.
Where do we go from that just raw pain?
So in the grief recovery, they talk about unresolved grief being unresolved communications, and that there are things that you wish were better, different, or more. And that there's, how to then communicate those and feel heard communicating those things. So some of that is around telling those stories. Some of that is around feeling heard. Some of that is around maybe connecting with other people who have been through the same, because that just helps to normalize it and also helps to make you feel more comfortable in talking about those things. Because if you're worried about what the other person is going to think or do or say, then you're not going to really feel able to open up to them or to talk openly. I mean, for goodness sake, I sometimes used to sometimes lie about my job because I could see the discomfort in people's faces. As soon as I mentioned the word Macmillan or cancer, they'd almost want to run a mile. So if you're at a social party or something, so what do you do? I'd almost kind of put a spin on it so it wasn't as uncomfortable for the other person. Does that make sense? Sounds ridiculous, I know. But
no,
we're
absolutely.
worried about what other people are feeling and thinking. We're not thinking about ourselves. So sometimes it's just time to be selfish, isn't it? And think about what do you need and who can you talk to and how can you ask the person you're talking to listen in the right way. And again, the grief recovery talk about having a heart with ears and open ears, that you just sit there with no judgment, that you sit there, you don't compare what happened to you are able to help that person tell that story and talk about the things that they wish were different, better or more, apologize for what they feel as they needed to apologize for, or give forgiveness for what you feel needs to be forgiven, and acknowledge kind of really significant emotional things that you're feeling, to help you kind of feel. I don't like the word closure, because we don't close the book on someone. They're with us forevermore. It's just about kind of, they sit in a little room in our heart, don't they? And it's just about whether when we open that room, whether it brings a smile to our face as we remember them, or whether it causes us to kind of crumble to our knees with grief and pain. And that will depend on what kind of day you're having, what mood you're having. And actually, if you do crumble to your knees with grief and pain, that's okay. It's not going to last forever. It's part of feeling it, and that's okay. In terms, you kind of need to feel it to get through it. You can't get around it. You can't escape it. And the more you try and push it down and bury it, the more it will come out in other ways. So you kind of have to feel it to move through it, and it's difficult, I know.
Are there I mean, I totally get this and I totally understand what you're saying, but because I lost my parents when I was a teenager, so I had all of this grief, this terrible grief, and I mean I was only young, so I had no idea, I had no concept of, I mean that's why I'm so passionate about therapy and coaching now, because it's about being able to, it saved me, really. It gave me the platform to be able to grieve. But it took me a long time to realize how to do it in a healthy way. I mean, I was in my 20s, so I just drank a lot. I just drank lots of wine and spirits, partied hard, and I got busy. And I mean, how do we, because it just sometimes just feels so unbearable, doesn't it? It just feels so unbearable to feel it. So I hear what you're saying is about, yes, we need to feel it, but I mean, are there any kind of healthier ways? I mean, drinking is not a healthy way because it just makes you even more depressed, but is there are we allowed to distract ourselves a little bit, or or is there a way of doing it?
I get what you're saying, and I think definitely, it's trying to find things that work for you, but in acknowledging what you're doing as a way of a choice of managing, rather than as a kind of subconscious way of coping. So
I like that.
you can drink a lot, you can eat a lot, you can shop a lot, you can go to the gym a lot, you can do anything to excess as a way of escaping how you're feeling. But acknowledging how you're feeling and working out what's helped you in the past, what has helped me before when I've been through challenging or difficult times. Is that talking to someone? Is that writing a journal? Is that painting? Is it, what activities that aren't kind of self-destructive, I suppose, are going to help me kind of mindfully live through this experience and find a new way of creating kind of my life without this person or without this job or without, whatever it is that you've lost. Alongside, maybe journaling your emotions, maybe again, that gratefulness for what we do have, and I think this time has really shown us, hasn't it, that actually we think we're in control of so much, but we're in control of so little. And people talk about these uncertain times, but it was always uncertain. It's just now that we really know that it's uncertain. So it's very much about enjoying things that you have in the moment, because you don't know when it's going to be taken away.
Yeah, I mean, I think this time is also, normally we'd be distracting ourselves and going out more and have more things to be busy with, and this has allowed us to sit at home. I mean, I know not for all of our not for everybody, I know that's not true, but for many of us it's meant, but even the people who are on the front line, they're still coming home and maybe not being able to get away using their usual mechanisms to deal with all that's happening. So I think it's been an interesting thing. It's showing in the spotlight, basically, this is how you used to escape from your feelings. This is how you used to self-soothe is a word that I used to use. This is how I self-soothe. And sometimes it was healthy and sometimes unhealthy. And I suppose it's the healthier ways we can do it, the better. For me, I think it was reading memoirs and inspirational books. So I remember when I read Cheryl Strayed's book, Wild, about when she lost her mum. And then she went on a trek of 1,000 miles through the kind of American wilderness. And for me, she managed to be able, for me, I love writing and writers. So it really spoke to me because it was somebody talking about intense grief. She was so grieving so much, she would literally eat the ashes of her mom. Do you know what I mean? It was really hardcore, extreme. But I was like, finally somebody gets it. And it was like being seen in my grief. Do you know what I mean? And even though that many years later, it was a very healing process for me to have someone who could express the depth of your grief. And then you were like, yes, that's exactly how it feels. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And don't forget, no one is alone in this, because it's the one thing, isn't it, that's for sure in life. So we're going to die and we're going to lose people, as sad and awful as it is. And I think, a way of coping with that is not to really think about it too much, because if we did, we probably would struggle to get out of bed every morning. But so, you're not alone in this. There are plenty of people who are experiencing or have experienced grief. Goodness me, you lost your mum. I lost my dad a couple of years ago very suddenly. The shock, the distress, all those emotions that you go through, whilst having to look after, 2 small children and work and the rest of it. So it's no mean feat. And I think there's a lot that employers can do for their staff as well, if they know that they're grieving or they've lost someone, in terms of just being compassionate. Just show some human compassion, please. It's not hard, is it? So many people are going through a tough time, whether you have lost someone or you're a healthcare worker on the front line, dealing with losing all those patients. And yes, it's your job, but you're not set up for a job like that. No one is. You didn't sign up to a job, to see that necessarily. So I think for all those healthcare workers, again, having time to reflect and process and talk and debrief is really, really important. And I do hope that employers are able to provide their staff with that space and time to do that, because it is tough. It is tough. But there are things that can help, and I'll put some resources on my Facebook page of kind of places that people can go to if they want help and support.
Amy, that's fantastic. So all Amy's details are below. So do click and join Amy's Facebook page, or like her Facebook page for more information on this. Amy, thank you so much for today. That was really, really useful. And I think, for me, I think the more we talk about this and we talk about grief, whether it is someone dying or just the grief of losing a job that we love or whatever, the more we talk about it, the less disconnected and lonely that we can feel. And then we can start edging through this period till it just doesn't feel so painful.
Definitely. I think death is the last taboo, really, isn't it, that we still are very uncomfortable talking about. But so if we can normalise that and enable people to have these discussions, then it's going to be helpful for lots and lots of people. So, yeah.
Yes. Amy, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, you're more than welcome. It's lovely to speak to you. Thank you for having me.
Lots of love. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.